Okay, today we're going to talk about the trade routes. As you can see, a lot of them going from Europe to China, lots of red, and the red are on land, the blue are on the water. But the important thing to take away from this whole about 15-minute little lesson here is all of this trade promoted the exchange of products and ideas, products being goods and ideas being ways to do things. So let's go ahead and get into this and see what we're going to find out. What we're going to talk about 6 trade routes, the top 3 being the most important to us, and we'll hit some of the minor trade routes here at the bottom. Some of the products that were exchanged along the trade routes, we've got them here. We'll talk about which trade routes they were on and what they meant. And then we'll go into some of the ideas that were traded. But again, the important thing is the trade patterns were the exchange of products and services. So Europe would send things over to Asia and Africa would send things back to Europe. And this would spawn later on what we're going to get to in our next couple of topics. This trade and this sharing of ideas would create the atmosphere and the conditions for the Renaissance, the scientific revolution, and other things. So the main one that a lot of people have heard of is the Silk Road. And you can see a lot of the roads out here across. The important thing to remember, it was not a single road, like the road in front of our school or the road in front of your house or I-95. It's a network. It's like an interstate system, if you will, that they had. There were different routes, and even here we see this one route. There may have been 5 or 6 different ways to get from this spot to Tashkent here. But it connected the Silk Road itself. It was the first one. Connected Europe, which was over here, and Asia. It lasted about 1,700 years, 1,700 years. And the distance from Rome to Xinyang is about 4,500 miles, which if you're walking is the distance from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles and back. That's how far it is from Rome if you walked all the way out through here, the longest ways over here. So to China, the Europe sent horses and art. They sent those along routes, and it took many, many months to get out there. And China then sent back porcelain, which you'll see here. They sent spices, silk, and paper back to Europe. So here's a little timeline of the Silk Road. China started producing silk about 3,000 years before the Common Era. And then about 2 centuries before, silk reached the Mediterranean. So about 2,800 years it took to travel just by spreading a word of mouth and everything. Then silk got to the Roman Empire. They started to like it, and they're like, hey, let's go find out where this stuff is. And they started going out. See, it took about 200 years to kind of figure out how to do that. And then trade ended in about 1500. So it lasted about 1700 years. A lot of things. Maritime trade starts. Italy starts making silk. But then the Silk Road ended in about 1500. So why did it end? Well, if you look at the timeline, Italy started producing their own silk. They started having maritime trade. And the word maritime means navigation on the seas. So once we had boats, they could start doing boats around, and that's a lot faster, and they can carry more, and it's safer. You don't have to worry about people robbing you while you're out on the roads with your caravan. And then the Ming Dynasty in China basically put the hand up and said, we're not going to trade and do contact with any foreigners in any foreign country. So there was no more where to shop. Basically, the grocery store closed. The Walmart closed for us. So that's why it started, and that's when it ended. So China ended their trade, and Europe started producing the goods that they liked over here. They started growing the spices. They started making pottery, finding a way to do it, and the silk they were starting to make. So some of the maritime routes, you see them here. Here's the Mediterranean. So they would go across land and start on the water here and come down into India to get spices and come over to China to get items, bring them all back and back up in here. And then the land route was much shorter. Instead of walking the whole way over through here and getting robbed and being slow, they could bring it down to a port, take it down, sail it. These are the big British ships. that would go from the Atlantic Ocean way over here around Africa and up. And then these are Indian dhows that would do some of the smaller trading that you see here, some of these smaller routes. Some of the products, textiles, meaning cloth, clothing, spices, lots of different spices, tea from India. The numerical system, 1, 2, 3, 4, most important, 0, came in from Arabia and from India. So those ideas, they were using Roman numerals up until that point. You can't. There's no Roman numeral for 0. The Trans-Saharan Route, I'll show you a picture of that one in just a minute, but it linked North and West Africa, the Songhai Empire, to the Middle East, to the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was already trading with the West in the Roman Empire. Islam was spread to West Africa using this trade route. They brought gold and salt. Salt was very much used in a lot of things. That's where the term salary comes from, as a matter of fact, where you get paid in salt. And some scientific transfer. The Arabs and the West Africans had medicine, a lot of different things they used for medicine, studying the stars, and math. A lot of those concepts came from this route. And here was the Trans-Saharan Routes. So here's right about where that A is where Rome would be, in Italy, and Europe is up here. So the Ottoman Empire and the Muslims were out here, and they started their trade, and it went through Africa, down around all those different areas, and eventually at the end, all of that area was converted to Islam, and it's still pretty much Islam today. In Northern Europe, you had the Holy Roman Empire, which we know is Germany today, and other states, Austria, areas here which would become the Baltic states and Scandinavia and England. They wanted to trade, so the northern routes connected Northern Europe, because they didn't have an ocean really. They connected them to the Black Sea, where they could then connect to the Silk Road or down to the Indian routes in the Sinai. But all of this connected and shared wealth, shared ideas, shared things like food and textiles that were coming around, and helped give people new things. The Western route, this was mostly the Roman Empire. Everything in pink here was the Roman Empire. You can see all the different trade routes they had. This was the border. They had maritime routes here. They had land routes. And they used a lot of rivers, especially in Europe, to trade things. The Rhine River, the Danube River, or some of the different items that they shared and traded. But again, food, textiles, and ideas were moving around. And then the South China Sea was mainly from China to all the different islands within the Southeast Asia area, within China's area of influence. And then they would gather items and then send them back on the Silk Road or over through the Indian Maritime. But another big thing was it spread Buddhism, which started in India, came over, bounced around with all the trade routes and things. And by the end, a lot of those countries, and still today, except for down in here, we've got Malaysia now. Malaysia is the largest Muslim country by population in the world. But that's how Buddhism spread. So in conclusion, again, we've mentioned it. All of these routes, these are just kind of generic things here, representations. They traded ideas and products. It increased wealth in a lot of Europe and people in Asia and India. And it set the age for Western humanism, the Renaissance, and scientific revolution, which we'll be getting to in our next couple of blocks.